These are 10 facts about Canadian geography that will surprise even lifelong Canadians. From a friendly war fought with whiskey bottles to islands that contain their own lakes with more islands inside them, Canada's geography is far stranger than what we learned in school. Let's start with what might be the most Canadian conflict in history. Until 2022, Canada was technically at war with Denmark over a tiny barren rock in the Arctic. Hans Island, or Tartupaluk as it's known in Inuktitut, sits in the Kennedy Channel between Ellesmere Island and Greenland. For nearly 50 years, Canadian and Danish forces would visit this uninhabited island, plant their flag, and leave behind a bottle of Canadian whiskey, or Danish schnapps, for the other side to find. This so-called Whisky War finally ended on June 14, 2022, when both countries agreed to split the island roughly in half, which means Canada now shares a land border with Denmark, making it only the second country Canada borders by land after the United States. But Hans Island barely scratches the surface of Canada's island mysteries. Most Canadians know we have a lot of islands, but the actual number is staggering. Canada has over 30,000 named islands along its coastline, and that doesn't even count the countless unnamed ones. To put this in perspective, Canada's coastline stretches for 202,080 kilometers. If you could somehow straighten it out, it would wrap around the Earth's equator 5 times. That's more coastline than the next 9 countries combined. Here's where it gets even more mind-bending. In Lake Huron sits Manitoulin Island, the world's largest freshwater island. But Manitoulin Island itself contains 108 lakes, and some of those lakes have islands in them. So yes, there are islands in lakes on an island in a lake. If that doesn't make your brain hurt, consider this. One of those lakes on Manitoulin Island, Lake Manitou, is the world's largest lake on a freshwater island, and it has islands in it too. Speaking of lakes, here's a fact that should be Canada's ultimate bragging right. We have more lakes than the rest of the world combined. Over 2 million lakes cover about 7.6% of Canada's land mass. We're home to 60% of all the lakes on Earth. And before you ask, yes, that's been verified by multiple geographical surveys. Canada contains approximately 20% of the world's freshwater supply, and that's not even counting our ice caps and glaciers. Now, let's head east to one of Canada's most mysterious places. About 300 kilometers off the coast of Nova Scotia lies Sable Island, a 42-kilometer crescent of sand that's home to over 500 wild horses. These horses have been living on this remote sandbar since the 1700s and are now legally protected. But here's the really strange part. The entire island is moving. Sable Island shifts about 200 meters eastward every year due to erosion on its western side and sand deposition on its eastern side. It's literally walking across the ocean floor. This sandy island has earned the nickname Graveyard of the Atlantic because over 350 shipwrecks lie scattered around its ever-shifting shores. Think Canada is all ice and snow. Parts of southern Ontario are actually further south than northern California. In fact, if you're in Windsor, Ontario, you're south of parts of California, Oregon, Nevada, and Utah. Even more surprising, Canada has its own desert complete with cacti, rattlesnakes, and scorpions. The Osoyoos Desert in British Columbia is Canada's only true desert, though technically it's the northern tip of the Sonoran Desert that extends up from Mexico. Here's a geographical oddity that defies logic. Hudson Bay has less gravity than the rest of Earth. You actually weigh slightly less standing on the shores of Hudson Bay than you would anywhere else on the planet. This gravitational anomaly exists because the Earth's crust is still slowly rebounding from being compressed by massive ice sheets during the last ice age. The ice was so heavy, it literally squished the land down. And even though the ice melted over 10,000 years ago, the Earth is still bouncing back at a rate of about 1 centimeter per year. Canada's size creates some truly bizarre situations. Devon Island in Nunavut is the world's largest uninhabited island at 55,247 square kilometers. That's bigger than Costa Rica, but not a single person lives there. Meanwhile, 90% of Canada's entire population lives within 160 kilometers of the US border. We have the world's second largest country by area, Yet most of us are huddled along the southern edge like we're afraid of our own geography. The Bay of Fundy between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia showcases another Canadian extreme. It has the world's highest tides, with water levels changing by up to 16 meters twice daily. That's the height of a 5-story building. Over 100 billion tons of water flow in and out of the bay with each tide cycle. That's more water than all the world's freshwater rivers combined. Let's venture to Canada's extremes. The northernmost permanently inhabited place on Earth is Alert, Nunavut, sitting at 82 degrees 30 minutes north. It's so far north that from early April to early September, the sun never sets. Then from October to February, it never rises. Only about 60 people live there year-round, mostly military personnel and Environment Canada staff. On the opposite end, Canada's southernmost point isn't on the mainland at all. Middle Island in Lake Erie extends further south than parts of California. Most Canadians don't even know this island exists, let alone that it marks our southern extreme. Climate change is literally redrawing Canada's map. As Arctic ice melts, new islands are emerging that have been buried under glaciers for thousands of years. In 2018, several new islands were discovered in the Arctic archipelago. At the same time, other islands are disappearing as rising sea levels and erosion wash them away. The Northwest Passage, which was once permanently frozen, is now navigable for parts of the year, creating new geopolitical tensions as various countries argue over whether these are Canadian internal waters or international shipping lanes. Wood Buffalo National Park straddles the border between Alberta and the Northwest Territories, and it's larger than the entire Netherlands. This single park covers 44,807 square kilometers. It's home to the world's largest free-roaming wood buffalo herd and serves as the only natural nesting ground for endangered whooping cranes. The park is so vast that it has its own weather systems. Here's something that sounds like science fiction, but is completely real. Canada is home to a new type of bear. When polar bears and grizzly bears mate, they produce offspring called growler bears or pizzly bears. These hybrids have been appearing more frequently as climate change pushes grizzly bears further north and polar bears further south, causing their territories to overlap. These hybrid bears have the white fur of a polar bear mixed with the brown patches of a grizzly, creating an entirely new animal that didn't exist in nature until recently. Canada's geography keeps revealing new surprises. In Moncton, New Brunswick, there's a place called Magnetic Hill, where cars appear to roll uphill when placed in neutral. This optical illusion is created by the surrounding landscape, which tricks your brain into thinking downhill is uphill. It's become such a famous anomaly that there's now an entire tourist complex built around watching cars seemingly defy gravity. The numbers that define Canada are almost incomprehensible. We have 8,891 kilometers of border with the United States, making it the world's longest international border between two countries. We're the only nation that borders 3 oceans, the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic. Our 9.98 million square kilometers of total area includes more geographical diversity than almost any other country on Earth, from rainforests in British Columbia to Arctic tundra in Nunavut, from prairie grasslands to maritime coastlines. Every year, researchers and geographers discover something new about Canadian geography. Lakes appear and disappear with the seasons, islands emerge from melting ice, coastlines reshape themselves, rivers change course. For a country that many think of as stable and unchanging, Canada's geography is surprisingly dynamic, constantly evolving and revealing new secrets. These facts barely scratch the surface of Canada's geographical wonders. In a country this vast, with this much wilderness still unexplored, who knows what other mysteries lie hidden in our lakes, forests, and frozen northern reaches? What we do know is that Canada's geography is far more complex, strange, and fascinating than most of us ever realized. The next time someone tells you Canada is just ice and trees, you'll have plenty of evidence to prove them